Greetings to you, friends. You are watching Ruslan Belov's channel, and before you is another daily summary regarding the course of combat operations on the Ukrainian front. Let us begin with the political part. On the eve, Volodymyr Zelensky spent practically the entire day making emotional statements, complaining about what was happening. He spoke about how something allegedly outrageous had occurred, claimed that Vladimir Putin had violated the ceasefire regime, and asked rhetorical questions about how many days in a week Russia considers to be a ceasefire. He emphasized that the week had not yet ended, yet strikes had already followed. In his statements, he attempted to present the situation as if Moscow was acting unlawfully, appealing to Donald Trump with a call to influence the Russian side. However, Trump himself publicly stated that the ceasefire regime operated strictly within the agreed-upon framework, from Sunday to Sunday. The Russian side, according to him, fulfilled the obligations it had undertaken. The ceasefire ended at the established time, after which the strikes followed. Thus, from a formal point of view, no grievances arise regarding Moscow's actions. As a result, this entire situation put Zelensky, to put it mildly, in a less than advantageous light. Meanwhile, combat operations on the front line continue, and we are moving directly to the analysis of the situation. Let us begin with the Huliaipole direction. Here, changes have been recorded in the area of the settlement of Sviatopetrovka. Units of the Russian grouping Vostok published video materials starting from early morning, confirming the establishment of control over this settlement. In fact, we are observing a trend in which Russian troops have been taking one settlement per day for several days in a row. During the month of January, the grouping was clearly accumulating resources and personnel, and has now transitioned to the active phase of offensive operations along practically the entire line of combat contact. At the same time, yesterday turned out to be extremely difficult for the units of the Vostok grouping. From the Ukrainian side, from the direction of the settlement of Vozdvizhenka, a large-scale attack on Russian positions was undertaken. Units of the armed forces of Ukraine attempted to break through the defenses on the Gaichor line, which Russian troops had previously occupied. A significant amount of equipment was deployed for this attack. According to available information, 5 tanks, 2 armored fighting vehicles, and more than 10 units of motor vehicles participated in the offensive. In total, we are talking about approximately 20 units of equipment. Honestly speaking, it is difficult to remember the last time the Ukrainian side used 5 tanks at once in a single attack. Before the start of the assault, the armed forces of Ukraine launched a massive strike using drones on supply routes and the near rear of Russian units. According to Russian soldiers, as a result of these strikes, part of the equipment was indeed disabled. After this, Ukrainian forces moved directly to the offensive. However, Russian artillery played its role here, working as effectively as possible. Since early morning, artillery units have been striking the advancing units of the armed forces of Ukraine, including the use of cluster munitions. As a result, the Ukrainian infantry advancing along the road was forced to take cover in ravines located along the route of movement. From there, they tried to continue their advance, but these positions were also under dense artillery fire. The result is as follows. The powerful attack was completely repelled, and the Ukrainian side suffered serious losses in both equipment and manpower. A logical question arises: what was the command of the armed forces of Ukraine counting on? The answer, essentially, is obvious. After the failures in the Ternovotoye area, the Ukrainian side attempted to change the situation by striking the already occupied Russian defensive lines. In the event of success, Russian troops would have had to ease the pressure on northern sectors, where an offensive is currently developing in the direction of Rozdestvenskoye, and urgently redeploy forces to eliminate the breakthrough. This, undoubtedly, could have slowed down the pace of advancement. However, this plan did not work. Russian units successfully repelled the counterattack. As I noted in the previous episode, the Ukrainian command has concentrated significant forces in this sector. The General Staff in Kiev set the task of stopping the advance of the Vostok grouping on the Vozdvizhenskaya defense line at any cost. This explains such attacks, which are difficult to call anything other than extremely risky and even suicidal. We will see whether the armed forces of Ukraine continue such attempts today or, having suffered such losses, will be forced to reduce their activity. Now let us move to the Pokrovsk direction. Here, new reports are also arriving. changes have been recorded in the area of the settlement of Gracino. The Ukrainian analytical resource Deep State confirmed the advance of Russian troops in this settlement. Russian units continue to establish themselves in Gracino, and by all appearances, the completion of the cleanup is a matter of the near future. In the comments under the previous episodes, two interesting questions were raised. The first concerns the possibility of storming such a large city as Zaporizhzhia. Even if Russian troops reach its outskirts, will there be enough resources and strength to take such a large metropolis? During the entire time of the conflict, the Russian army has not stormed cities of a similar scale. The largest of the taken cities was Mariupol, with a pre-war population of about 420,000 people. Zaporizhzhia is twice as large. Before the start of combat operations, approximately 810,000 people lived there. Even now, despite the fact that the front line passes only 13 to 14 kilometers south of the city, about 500,000 residents remain in Zaporizhzhia. A logical question arises. Will the Russian army be able to digest such a city? Perhaps for some, this will sound unexpected, but it is precisely the large size of the city that may become a bigger problem for the armed forces of Ukraine than for the Russian troops. If we recall recent examples, Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad, Siversk, Huliaipole, it becomes obvious that Russian units had to spend significantly more time and resources on overcoming the approaches to these cities than on the urban battles themselves. Myrnohrad was taken in approximately 1 month, Siversk in less than a month, and Gulipole also in less than a month. Even Pokrovsk, which held out longer, still fell faster than the approaches to it were breached. The reason for this lies in the fact that the armed forces of Ukraine at the present moment do not have a sufficient amount of infantry to saturate the urban development and organize a full-fledged defense. They can no longer repeat the scenarios of Bakhmut or Toretsk, when tens of thousands of fighters were brought into the cities and the assault went literally house by house, entrance by entrance, and apartment by apartment. Such urban battles are no longer observed, and the key reason is an acute shortage of prepared, trained, and motivated infantry. While previously the armed forces of Ukraine had tens of thousands of fighters ready to fight and die, today their overall situation is significantly worse, and the number of truly motivated soldiers is extremely limited. This is clearly visible in the example of how quickly the so-called grey zone expanded in Pokrovsk, Siversk, or Myrnohrad. In Zaporizhzhia, the process will be similar, but on a larger scale, simply because of the size of the city. If the Russian army reaches the city from the south and east, a gradual penetration into the urban development will begin. The armed forces of Ukraine will not be able to completely prevent this. Russian units will filter through positions, establish themselves, build logistics, and advance further inland. The grey zone will expand, then transition under full control, and this process will intensify. This is precisely why the large area of the city creates more problems for the armed forces of Ukraine than for the Russian side. For the Russian troops, the key task is to minimize losses at the stage of reaching such cities, and from there, the pace of advancement, as a rule, increases. The second question concerned which cities could come under the control of the Russian army this year, with almost 100% probability. Of course, one cannot speak of a 100% guarantee, but the probability can be estimated at 99.9%. If we look at the current situation, Belitskoye will most likely be taken before the end of the year, and, moreover, it is one of the cities closest to being taken. Next is Konstantinovka. Battles are already ongoing there, and if nothing completely extraordinary happens, the city will come under the control of Russian troops this year. A similar situation exists with Lyman. The probability of its capture is also extremely high. Of the large settlements, Svyatogorsk remains. Full-scale assault operations are not yet being conducted there. Russian units have entered the outskirts, but there is no active phase of the storming yet. The probability of taking the city is high, but much depends on the situation with the heights on the opposite bank. If they are taken, Svyatogorsk will fall very quickly. If we talk about cities that are not yet being stormed but have high chances of being taken by the end of the year, then this is undoubtedly Orekov. There is practically no doubt that it will be taken. Also on this list are Dobropolye and Belozersk. Very high chances also exist for Nikolaevka. located near Slaviansk. However, all these cities are important in the context of a broader task, even if some of them, for one reason or another, are not taken. But at the same time, by the end of the year, the Russian army reaches the outskirts of Zaporizhzhia from the south and east. The main strategic goal of the year will be fulfilled. Many mistakenly believe that the key task is the capture of Kramatorsk and Slaviansk. This is not entirely true. Yes, there will be progress in this direction, and, most likely, the battles for Slaviansk will begin already this year. But the main task, which two groupings are working on right now, Dnieper and Vostok, is the approach to Zaporizhzhia. Returning to the previously touched topic, let us consider the situation using the example of Konstantinovka. Today, confirmation has finally been received that Russian troops managed to establish a foothold in the settlement of Ilinka, after which progress into Konstantinovka itself began from the western direction. Furthermore, Russian units are already entering Stepanovka. Effectively, the battle for the city is entering its most active phase. As soon as Russian troops manage to penetrate the urban development and establish stable logistics, the fate of the city can, essentially, be considered a foregone conclusion. To hold such a large settlement, the armed forces of Ukraine need to introduce at least 10,000 military personnel there and constantly maintain this number. And such a quantity of personnel automatically requires colossal volumes of supplies, ammunition, water, food, medicines, and everything associated with them. Moreover, during active combat operations, a large number of wounded inevitably appears who must be evacuated in a timely manner, and this requires stable and well-established logistics. It is precisely with logistics that the armed forces of Ukraine are currently experiencing serious problems. As a result, the Ukrainian side is physically unable, even with a great desire, to redeploy significant masses of infantry into the city. One problem is superimposed on another, and all of this directly reflects on the ability to hold the city. We continue to monitor this sector closely and will see how much time will be required for the complete cleanup of such a large settlement from Ukrainian forces. Let me remind you that before the start of combat operations, the population of the city was approximately from 78 to 80,000 people. Now let us move to the Slaviansk direction. Here, changes have been recorded in several areas at once, near Pazino, Sako and Vanzeti, as well as in the areas of Minkovka and Novomarkovo. Let us start with Novomarkovo. Over the past 24 hours, video materials have arrived from this settlement, in which it is visible that the forward positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the western outskirts of Novomarkovo are under fire from the armed forces of Ukraine. At the same time, it is reported that Russian units were able to expand the control zone in this settlement by approximately 500 meters. Earlier, video recordings from another point were also published, where forward positions of the Russian army were recorded. There are also changes in the area of Minkovka. We already spoke about them on the eve. However, yesterday I did not have time to reflect this sector on the map. Today it was added, and according to updated data, over the past 24 hours, this section of the line of combat contact passed under the control of Russian troops. Also, as of today, information has been received about changes in the area of Pazino. It is reported that Russian units were able to level the front line between the settlements of Pazino and Sako and Vanzeti. The entire territory that I marked for you in red is now completely controlled by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Yesterday, video materials were also received from one of the points where forward positions of Russian troops were located, and it was confirmed that the control zone was expanded by another approximately 800 meters. We are moving to the Kranoliman direction. Reports are arriving from here that Russian troops continue to exert pressure in the direction of Lyman. In particular, another video material has appeared from the settlement of Stavki. From this point, it was recorded that the forward positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the urban development of Stavki are under fire from the armed forces of Ukraine. Russian sources report that Russian units have advanced along the borders of the settlement and occupied new positions in its southern part. Effectively, one can say that Stavki is now almost completely under the control of the Russian army. This opens up the possibility of further advancement toward Lyman from the northern direction as well. Thus, the city is gradually being taken into a ring, and the only settlement that at least somehow covers Lyman remains Drobyshevo. However, as soon as Russian troops deepen directly into the city itself, Drobyshevo will no longer be able to play a restraining role, and units of the armed forces of Ukraine will be forced to withdraw from there. Now let us move to the Kupiansk direction. According to reports from Russian sources, the cleanup of the Kupiansk-Uzlovoy area continues. Also noted is the advancement of Russian troops from the direction of Kurilovka and from the direction of the settlement of Podoli toward Kupiansk. It can be stated that a critical situation is developing for the armed forces of Ukraine here, including in the Petropavlovka area. Earlier, information had already arrived from Russian sources that Petropavlovka had completely passed under the control of Russian troops. However, there have been no confirmed data on Kucherovka yet. This means that the presence of units of the armed forces of Ukraine still remains there. At the same time, Russian troops continue their movement toward Kupiansk. In the event the ring is closed, all Ukrainian units located in Kucherovka and on the outskirts of Petropavlovka will find themselves in encirclement, if they have not already found themselves there, given the delays in the arrival of information. Let me remind you that on the eve it was reported that fighters of the armed forces of Ukraine were surrounded in Kurilovka. Since Russian troops significantly advanced in Kupiansk-Uzlovoy, it is obvious that in this direction the Russian army is exerting serious pressure and achieving significant successes. As of today, the situation in this sector is exactly like this. And now we move to the Volchansk direction. In the area of Volchansk, fierce combat operations continue for Volchansk Kutora. Information is also arriving that Russian units are successfully advancing in the vicinity of Simonovka, Vilcha, and Grafskoye. Simonovka is located here, Vilcha is in this area, and Grafskoye is located right here. Today, changes have been recorded on this section of the line of combat contact. A large part of the settlement of Grafskoye has already passed under the full control of Russian troops. Let me remind you that earlier, Russian units took Simonovka, after which they began advancing with the aim of cutting the supply road. At the present moment, this road is at least under fire control and possibly already under physical control. Russian troops continue the gradual cleanup of Grafskoye, and in the near future, one can expect further advancement and the complete liberation of this territory. Also, reports are arriving that the control zone around the settlement of Vilcha will be significantly expanded. Earlier, it was reported that units of the armed forces of Ukraine tried to conduct counterattacks in the direction of Vilcha and push back Russian forces. However, these attempts proved unsuccessful. The majority of the assault groups were destroyed while still on the approaches with the help of FPV drones. As of today, these are all the main news and changes. I thank everyone for your attention and for watching. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel. See you soon.